9 days ago, the Mavs closed out a series where their offense looked completely unstoppable against the #1 defense. And it all started with how Luka completely dissected them in the pick and roll. More times than not, Rudy Gobert's gonna sit back in a deep drop, and Luka countered by turning the corner to get Jaden McDaniels on his back. From there, he'd play in between and hunt out space for mid-range buckets. So he got to his spots over and over again at will, just absolutely torching the Wolves inside of 10 feet. What makes this so impossible to defend is his patience, because if that big even thinks about committing to the ball, he's lobbing it up to one of his bigs. Typically in a drop like this, it's the low man's job to sink in and take away the lob, but the Mavs countered that by putting their best shooter, Kyrie, in the weak side corner and having him clear out whenever the action started. So essentially, the pick and roll was played in a 2-on-2. Once the screen hit, it was a 2-on-1, and the Mavs got whatever they wanted. So the Wolves adjusted their coverage. In an effort to keep Luka away from the paint, they blitzed him as far out as half court, to which he calmly made the right read to create a 4-on-3 advantage for his team to attack. And although Gafford isn't particularly great at executing in the short roll, when given that much time and space to read the defense, the decision making is so simple that the team is likely going to end with a good shot. To prevent the spaced out 4-on-3s and the downhill attacks at bigs, they found a middle ground with the hedge. But that didn't exactly work either, and that's because this created a new 2-on-1. Towns has to cover both the roller and a shooter in the corner, to which Luka made sure that he always made the wrong choice. It all comes back to numbers advantages. Drops and hedges created a 2-on-1, blitzes created a 4-on-3. If only there was an option that prevented this altogether. This is where personnel makes all the difference. Gobert is very much like Porzingis, a giant rim protector who you can squeeze the most value from if they're near the paint. But when they get pulled into actions 30 or 35 feet away from the basket or have to switch onto guards, that presence isn't at all the same. However, there are two huge differences in personnel between the Wolves and Celtics that completely change the dynamic of what's possible. First is the versatility of Al Horford. Even at 38 years old, he's mobile and skilled enough as a perimeter defender to hold up on switches. More importantly though, is the massive disparity between who's playing the 4. Towns is not a good drop defender, and he also can't consistently switch onto guards, meaning that every single time he was pulled into screening action, he was either in a blitz or a hedge, to which the Mavs had an automatic numbers advantage. Those sort of limitations do not exist with the Celtics, and that's because Tatum is one of the most versatile defenders in the NBA. In game 1, they put him on whoever Dallas had at the 5, and then they'd switch all screens involving Luka. Instead of a numbers advantage going downhill, the play is turned into a 1-on-1 against an elite defender, which isn't quite as easy. Don't get me wrong, Luka's probably the best isolation scorer in the NBA right now, so regardless of who you put in front of him, there's a pretty good chance he'll be able to create decent shots at volume. And that stood out against his primary matchup, Jaylen Brown, who he hit a few tough shots over. But for the most part, Jaylen clearly took him out of his comfort zone. He met him with constant ball pressure, forcing action to start at the logo, and this time he picks his pocket while fighting over a screen, then leaks out in the open floor, which leads to a free 2 points. That wasn't the only time he did that. Later in the game, he again meets Luka with immediate pressure, pokes the ball right out of his hands, with nobody to stop him from jogging into a dunk. As for Kyrie Irving, he had to deal with Jrue Holiday. Like I said with Luka, sometimes these guys are just going to create and make shots that you have to live with, but with a defender of Holiday's caliber hounding you all over the court, it'll definitely do a number on your ability to generate quality looks for yourself. The natural response is to hunt for a switch onto someone else, and so that's what Kyrie did. The thing is, anytime he got a matchup he wanted and cleared out for an isolation, he was playing right into the hands of Boston's defensive strategy. Sam Hauser might not be an ideal defender for Kyrie, but the goal was to freeze out the rest of the offense. Nobody's moving, nobody else is touching the ball, and Kyrie gets to a tough bucket. That wasn't always the case though. These weaker defenders off the bench were supposed to be food, and instead they held up impressively well. The same applies against Luka. He's got Sam Hauser on an island, and notice how he positions his body to lead him into help at the nail. Luka tries to force his way to the open corner and ends up turning it over. Then when there isn't nail help because they clear the top of the key, yes, Luka's probably going to create a good look, but the diet of shots is what's important here. Against the Wolves, they were getting a ton of lobs and corner threes, assisted baskets. Against the Celtics, it was all about hero ball, tough off the dribble jumpers, less space to operate, and that brand of basketball just isn't nearly as efficient. If they wanted to get back to creating an advantage with numbers, they'd have to use one of their forwards as the screener. That way, instead of a wing switching on to Luka, it's Kristaps who has to execute an actual pick and roll coverage, and from there Luka can do what he does best. Well, not quite. For one, with a traditional 5 on the floor such as Lively or Gafford, whoever the low man is can sink in on the lob, which allows Kristaps to sit back in a deep drop. And there are very few better at completely shutting off the paint. One way the Mavs tried to counter was by having that screener pop. The Celtics made it clear right away though that they do not respect these guys as shooters, so these are the opportunities that are going to have to start falling. Because if not, the advantage of forcing Kristaps to defend screens is almost nullified. He can just park himself near the basket while they let Washington or Jones shoot practice jumpers from outside. Another problem is that these forwards do not have the same interior scoring presence that the bigs do, so that only makes things easier for Kristaps as a rim protector. Really, there's only one drawback to having Kristaps drop like this, and that's the fact that both Luka and Kyrie are elite off the dribble 3-point shooters. So a few times he actually did find himself switched onto the ball, and as I briefly mentioned earlier, that's not exactly the ideal situation for his skill set. One way they countered was by pre-switching. Instead of stepping up to defend a screen, he calls for White to take his place, then they can switch like they want, and sometimes Luka's just gonna Luka. However, when it's Horford who's playing the 5 instead of Kristaps, we're talking about a completely different story, because he will switch onto Luka every single time, and I can't believe how well he held up in space. Tactically, he did everything right. He'd park himself on Luka's left hip, completely taking away the step back jumper and funneling him inside the arc. In a double big lineup, that means running right into the giant. And later in that game, Luka tried to make an adjustment. Because Horford takes away the step back to his left, he decides to step back to his right, which the big man denies. Between Kyrie and Luka, Horford defended the two on 13 different shots. Matchup data, of course, isn't perfect, but Kyrie shot 2 of 5, while Luka shot a measly 1 of 8. That's a combined 3 of 13 with Al as the primary defender. And the amount of versatility within these lineups just gives them endless possibilities. They can change matchups. This time it's Holiday who's on Gafford, and that's so Horford can stay on the baseline for some added rim protection. But this time Horford's up in the action as his man screens, with Jaylen Brown on Gafford, meaning it's his job to protect the rim, which he does with emphasis. There was also one possession in the second where Horford called for a pre-switch. Kyrie's getting ready to come off a screen, so he sends Derek White to go switch with Holiday, and Kleba ends up setting an illegal. In addition to changing matchups, they also mixed up coverages against ball screens. This time, instead of switching, Horford decides to sit back in a deep drop. Like I said, with Tatum in the middle of the paint, there's no lob, and all Kyrie has is a really tough shot. Horford also did a decent bit of hedging, stepping up to the ball while he waits for Drew to recover, and the play resets with no advantage. This time he hedges against Luka, and that once again makes Jaylen the low man as he rotates down to blow up a lob. The play doesn't end there though. With a few extra passes, the ball finds Jones down low, and remember I said that he doesn't have the same sort of interior presence? Basically what I'm getting at is the fact that the Celtics were able to take away almost everything the Mavs want to do. I started this video talking about how the Wolves had no answer for lobs. There wasn't a single lob in game 1 of the finals. Well, if there's no lob, that means they're over-indexing to take away the paint, right? Wrong. Outside of Luka, the Mavs attempted 13 threes and made 3 of them, so the perimeter was also a complete non-factor. What does that leave? The one-on-one game. Luka got his 30 points, but it took him 26 shots to get there, and he only had 7 potential assists. In the conference finals, he averaged just under 14, meaning those opportunities were sliced in half. And the same goes for Kyrie. He only had 3 potential assists after averaging over 7 in the previous round. The difference for him is that he didn't have the same scoring presence that Luka did. He shot just 6 of 19 from the field, meaning that basically their only source of offense was whatever Luka could create one-on-one. As a result, they recorded their lowest offensive rating of the entire postseason, scoring less than 97 points per 100 possessions. As far as adjustments go, I'm not quite sure what to expect. For one, it's going to take much better shooting across the board. When Kristaps is sitting back and drop, those wings need to hit shots, or they need to be replaced with someone who can. More importantly is the shot making of Kyrie. If he and Luka are forced to beat the Celtics with one-on-one scoring, both have to be firing on all cylinders and scoring an efficient 30 points. What I'm anticipating most though is whether or not Kidd and his staff can find a way to attack Kristaps. If they can force him to match up with Lively or Gafford, they can run spread pick and roll like they did against the Wolves and get back to creating those numbers advantages. If they can't find a way to attack Kristaps with their rolling bigs, they might be forced to play more 5-out with Kleber on the floor. With all of that said, the bottom line here is how well the Celtics approached this game. Their combination of defensive versatility and brilliant strategy completely shut down a Mavs offense that looked unstoppable just 9 days ago. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on to be first on more content. If you're interested in my more in-depth research, make sure to check out my website and social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you thought of this matchup. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.